Today I want to give people as accurate of a picture as I can possibly give you of what's going on in the housing market, kind of like I did the other day for the job market, because there's a lot of conflicting information flying around about all of this stuff. And really, for the average person that's not paying attention to this stuff on a regular basis, probably has no idea what's going on. You just go from headline to headline and take whatever they tell you at face value, but the truth couldn't be further from what they're telling you, guys. Because the first thing I want to start with is how right now is actually a buyer's market. And even though by traditional historical standards it's not, which means we need to have more than 6 months worth of inventory on the US housing market for it to be considered a buyer's market, the rules of the game have been changing, because buyer demand is extremely low. You know, we're talking demand levels that we haven't seen since the early 1990s, all right? And at the same token, Redfin just came out with some data showing us that there are 36.8% more sellers than buyers as of October of 2025. And that is the largest gap in their records dating back to 2013, which means you just have way too many sellers and not enough buyers right now. And that's the sort of imbalance that we can use to define a buyer's market. It doesn't have to be a certain level of inventory anymore. It's more the state of affairs that kind of defines whether it's a seller's market or buyer's market. Because put the shoe on the other foot. If you had 36% more buyers than sellers, we would be calling it a seller's market, right? But it isn't. In fact, even Redfin is changing how they define things. Redfin now defines a buyer's market as one with at least 10% more sellers than buyers. Well, by that standard, we are in a full-blown buyer's market because it is triple that. In fact, Redfin is telling us that the last time we had a buyer's market this strong was in the years following 2008 after the big housing market crash. And what have I been telling you on this channel for the past couple of months? If you are somebody who's looking to buy right now, it is the best time it has been in a while. Is it the best time? No, it's not. But compared to 2022, 2023, 2024, absolutely, so much better. Prices are coming down and are cheaper in many instances than it was in 2022. Interest rates are a little bit lower than they were over the past few years. And most of all, you have more selection, more choices as a buyer, which is extremely important. And of course, there is a catch though, and the catch is, even though it's a buyer's market, can you afford to buy at today's prices? And the answer for most people, unfortunately, is no. So a buyer's market doesn't automatically mean that all buyers are qualified and everybody just has plenty of options to choose from. But of course, as these conditions persist, then more sellers are going to have to come to grips with reality and price their property appropriately to get it sold if they're serious about selling. You know, one of the questions they pose in this Redfin article, is it really a buyer's market if so many buyers are still priced out and therefore not even looking? I would say yes. And the reason is because if you are looking and you can afford it, it is a buyer's market. It doesn't mean that every buyer out there or wannabe buyer has to be qualified or has to have the money to buy. That's not what defines a buyer's market. And the reason also why I say yes is not only by how much the sellers outnumber the buyers, but also because the longer that these conditions persist, the more the inventory will build, the lower the prices will come down, and therefore will lead to a situation where even more buyers are going to be in the market for a home and be able to afford one. So conditions are only going to get better over the next couple of years, not worse. Another thing to cut through the noise is forget about the median home prices, guys. According to Cotality, which was previously CoreLogic, they're saying that as of September, home prices nationwide on a median basis are 1.2% higher than they were a year ago, which is a nothing burger for a few different reasons. Number one is inflation. CPI is sitting at 3%. Official inflation is much higher, probably around 6%. So these homes are still essentially losing 5% a year right now when adjusted for inflation. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that wages are still going up more than those home values. You know, the wage increase information that we got from the most recent BLS report is people are seeing a 3.6 or 3.8% increase in wages. So for the first time in a while, wages are actually outpacing home price growth. which is going to make it easier for people to save. Let's face it, half the country is seeing home price declines right now. There is no growth. It's a decline. So if you're in a situation or a market where your income is going up, but home prices are coming down, that is wonderful news if you've been patient and have been waiting to buy a house. And if it feels like housing is still unaffordable in your area, just keep being patient, guys. Just keep waiting, keep saving, keep finding ways to increase your income, and your turn will come. We are in that market now where the tide is turning in your favor, and it's only a matter of time before you're going to be able to afford it. And don't forget, anybody who needs a buyer's agent or a seller's agent, I always have a link down in the description below. I have these services available to you 100% for free. And if you use it, not only is it helpful to you, but it helps the channel, and I appreciate it. What a gorgeous day in Miami Beach. Today I'm walking down Lakeview Drive, and this is one of the beautiful views they have along the way. Just can't beat it. Now, one area of the country where people might feel like housing is too unaffordable, even though to the rest of us, like in Florida or California or New York, might think it's just extremely cheap, is the Midwest, guys. You know, I've been telling people that if you want to be able to afford a home, the Midwest is where it's at right now. And I still think that's true. However, the caveat to that is, for a lot of people, if you're moving to the Midwest from a more expensive market. Because if you're somebody who lives there now, that might not be the case. Or really, not just the Midwest, but all of rural America. Like, here's what I mean. The median rural home price jumped 61% from 2019 to 2025, from $175,000 to $281,000. And this actually jumped up higher than the suburban and urban price growth of 49% and 46% respectively. That's quite a bit of a clip higher. The affordability crisis is actually hitting folks out in the sticks more than people who live in more suburban or urban areas. And a lot of this is due to the same reasons that everything else went up. You know, during the pandemic, a lot of people looked to move to cheap rural areas for a couple of different reasons. They were able to do remote work, so they could work from anywhere, still make a high income and easily afford it. A lot of people were also scared and wanted to get away and be able to be more self-sufficient and sort of live off grid, so to speak. And the thing about rural areas is there tends to be just less homes in general. There's just less homes available and even fewer homes for sale. And a lot of local buyers have to compete against each other and out-of-state buyers. And the result is those home prices have surged beyond what the rural incomes can support. So for example, the salary needed to afford a rural home has now doubled. In 2019, you only had to make $36,000 a year to be able to buy a house in the middle of nowhere. Now today it's $75,000 a year, guys. And we know most people living in these areas have not seen that kind of a pay raise. They just haven't. That's a 106% increase in income required, but the median rural household income is sitting at around $70,000. So it's still a little bit below where it needs to be, which means people need to stretch themselves financially to become a homeowner in these areas, or they have to settle for something that doesn't really fit their needs or wants. And we know it's out-of-towners who are driving up prices in a lot of these rural areas, because according to Fannie Mae mortgage data, the mortgage applications in rural areas continue to be above pre-pandemic levels, but the pool of local applications has not recovered since the pandemic. So you have more people buying there still, and fewer than ever are locals, which means people are moving there from out of town. Here's an example from New Hampshire. The required income to afford a median home, which has gone up 141% since 2019, now requires a whopping $120,000 per year. And also surrounding states in Vermont and Maine are experiencing similar major affordability jumps. And I'm not surprised to hear that, especially in the Northeast, because the Northeast is number one of the markets that's still holding up the best, and you're still seeing price growth in that market. But also, that's where a lot of old money is in the United States. There's a lot of generational wealth in the Northeast, and a lot of people who earn serious money that have some sort of income that's tied to New York City. And for people in rural Vermont, They're not going to be able to compete with somebody who makes $600K a year in New York City and can work remotely half the year. And this is how all this shapes up for different markets across the country. Sellers who want to sell, especially in areas where inventory is exploding right now, have to get serious about cutting the price. Here's an example of a seller from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is a very bougie area, if you've ever heard of it or been there. I've never been, but I've seen videos about it, and it's basically a playground for the rich, okay? But this guy was asking almost $1.9 million for his house over there. He had to reduce the price down to $1.65 million in order to get an offer, and then he got an offer within 3 days of that price reduction. But I see a lot of houses here in Miami that have even larger price reductions than that and have still been sitting on the market for months, if not over a year. And here's the facts and the reality about where you live and what might be happening in the market today. In the Northeast and the Midwest, still pretty strong demand, still some inventory shortages, still getting above asking price offers for very desirable properties or neighborhoods, versus the South and the Western parts of the country are experiencing quite the opposite. Very weak demand, homes sitting longer on the market, and more price cuts and homes still going unsold. You might have also seen the recent headline that talks about how home sales jumped in October to the highest point that we've seen since the early part of 2025. But don't get too excited about that, guys, because they only went up 1.2%, and that puts us at a 4.1 million homes sold on an annual basis for 2025, which is still the worst year on record since about 30 years ago. So that doesn't really do anything to make the housing market look good. It's just headline numbers like that, like I said in the beginning, that make everybody excited and try to create FOMO and try to push people into buying. You got to realize there's a lot of vested interest behind getting people in the mind frame to buy a home. Everybody has their hand in your pocket. Real estate agents, lenders, banks, local governments, national government. Everybody has an interest in you buying a home because everybody makes money off that transaction when you do it and long after you own it as well. And the fact of the matter is 19% of homes across the country are still selling above listing price, but a year ago it was 21%, so that number is coming down. But that is not the majority, in case you haven't noticed, and that's only happening on highly desirable properties that multiple people are interested in. And a lot of this is happening in the luxury market where it doesn't even impact the average Joe, okay? Because homes that are priced between $750,000 and $1 million, the sales of those homes are up 10% year over year. And homes over $1 million, the sales are up 16% year over year. And that's why the median home price is still creeping up at a measly 1.2% year over year. Ooh. Don't worry about it, guys. That's what I'm telling you. Do not worry about it. Another fact of life is that 29% of all sales that are taking place right now are still all cash. And investors and second home buyers are about 16% of the buyers out there. And first-time home buyers make up only 32% of home buyers. And that just goes to show you that this market is basically rich people buying real estate from rich people for the most part. And so that's why I'm telling the average person, you don't have to worry about this. You're not going to get left behind, because if you're an average Joe living in an average market, you're not competing with these people for the most part. Unless you live in the middle of nowhere and you see a lot of those properties being bought up by out-of-towners, then maybe you should be worried. But if that's not you, continuing to save and wait right now is probably the best thing you can do. But even the big price growth that we saw in the Northeast is starting to slow down. That's still the strongest region of the country. But prices are now up 6.5% year over year. So it's slowing down from those double-digit gains. In the West, home prices are flat at only 0.1% gains year over year. And in the South, the area that's getting hit the hardest, like especially here in Florida, guys, it's now normal to see double-digit declines year over year. There's several markets now here in Florida and the southern United States that are seeing 10% year-over-year losses in home values. And this is all leading to a situation where inventory continues to rise, okay? Inventory is up 11% year-over-year, which is fantastic for anybody who's been waiting. And the unsold inventory is sitting at about a 4.4 month supply, which, remember, anything over 6 has historically been considered a buyer's market. But We don't need to get to 6 months anymore with just how low demand is. Price cuts are also becoming far more common. On a national basis, about 20% of listings had a price cut as of October. And in summary, I think a lot of this is very good news for people who have been pushed to the sidelines. Like, is the market perfect yet? Is it the best time ever to jump in? No. But are the conditions improving and moving towards your favor as a buyer? Absolutely. And it's not too late for sellers either, guys, especially if you bought more than 5 years ago. You might not be making the profits that you would have made in 2022, but you're still doing okay and probably able to capitalize on a pretty large gain if you were to sell today. But this housing market slowdown is starting to have real consequences on the economy at large. Like, one of the biggest companies that's being impacted by this is Home Depot. In fact, the CEO of Home Depot this week issued a warning saying that the housing downturn is disproportionately impacting home improvement demand because homeowners are delaying big projects due to economic uncertainty and, let's face it, not having the money. Home Depot ended up missing Wall Street expectations yet again, the third consecutive quarter of missing the expectations. Needless to say, their stock price is being impacted by these misses negatively. Comparable sales at stores are sitting at flat numbers at only 0.2% up, which is essentially nothing. Customer transactions, though, are actually on the decline, down 1.4% as people are buying fewer items but spending a little bit more per visit. And that's the only thing that's keeping those numbers moving in a barely positive direction for Home Depot. Listen to this. Home Depot is actually kind of upset that there were no major natural disasters this summer. We didn't get slammed with a big hurricane here in Florida, or really anywhere for that matter, because they expected a surge in demand for materials like roofing materials, generators, plywood, but it never happened. And they cite the lack of major storms as one of the main reasons of reduced sales. So they're in the business now, they're admitting, of capitalizing on America's natural disasters. How wonderful is that? Now, there's nothing wrong with being there to supply things that people need when they need it, but to be upset that something like that didn't happen and that's why business isn't good is kind of crazy. That's like being a mortician and saying it's slow. Not enough people died this year, so yeah, hopefully next year's better. But more people are starting to wisen up with their finances, and a lot of homeowners are not taking on the big renovation projects like kitchen remodels and bathrooms or additions. Instead, they're opting to do smaller, cheaper tasks like improvements in landscaping or painting that can be done themselves and a lot cheaper to do. People are starting to wisen up and not wanting to take on massive debt or borrow against their home in a shaky economy. Even though a lot of people still are borrowing against their home, most likely to pay bills, not to do one of these renovations. And we're seeing historical levels of stagnation in real estate. Only 28 out of every 1,000 homes changed hands between January through September of this year, which is the lowest turnover rate since the early 1990s. And remember, the country was about 30% smaller population-wise in the 1990s. That just shows you how bad demand is right now. So this is all leading to Home Depot to lower their earnings expectations by 5% for fiscal 2025, and previously was only expected to be a 2% drop. And of course, Home Depot is just one of the many businesses and companies that's being affected by this housing downturn. Many others as well, like appliance companies that are not seeing the sales happen with that anymore, furniture companies. Those are things that people only need to buy every 10, 15, or 20 years. And once it's purchased, they don't need another one for a long time. And so many of that stuff was purchased during the pandemic. So if I was a home buyer in 2025 and moving into 2026, I would be really paying attention to your local market. What's happening with sales? Are the numbers increasing or decreasing? What's happening with inventory? Is that going up or declining? You know, what are you seeing happen with how long these homes are sitting on the market in your area? Are sellers being realistic? Are things selling? Are people still having their head in the clouds and not grounded in reality? And knowing all that stuff is going to help you determine the right type of offer to put together. You know, you're going to have to discuss it with your real estate agent and what they see with the local market, but do not trust everything that they say, because remember, their job is to sell you a home. They don't get paid unless they do. So that's why you need to do your own research and your own due diligence as well to make sure that your findings match up with what your real estate agent is telling you. And if they do, then that's a pretty good sign that you found somebody trustworthy with integrity and who is reliable to guide you through the process. But on the other hand, if your agent's telling you all the things that you want to hear to make things sound good, and that doesn't jive with what you're finding in the real world market conditions, run the other way, guys. Fire them, say, sorry, I'm going to find somebody else. Just don't ghost people. I don't think it's cool to ghost anybody over anything. You know, that happened to me a lot in real estate. And there's nothing worse than having clients and, you know, having people that you think you're going to be working with, and then they just kind of disappear and stop answering your calls or text messages. It's very cowardly. At least do the honorable thing and say, even lie if you have to, but let them down gently, you know? But I have a good feeling for a lot of people in 2026. I have a feeling a lot of you are going to be writing me emails and saying, thanks to you, Michael, I waited and I found a better deal than I could have found over the past 3 or 4 years. And it's all because of the things I learned from your channel. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to this channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here. And I'll see you in the next one.